It was a quiet time in the fleet after they patched up the ancient Comore and decided to depart the pirate-infested system. It was quiet for multiple reasons. Around the fleet, Ludigs gathered in small groups and prayed for those killed by pirates, and didn't pass an opportunity to complain that such a thing never would have happened if not for Domain's hubris and over-reliance on technology. After all, if humans stayed on Earth and led peaceful, backwards agrarian lives like God decreed, none of this would have happened. Unfortunately, looking deeper into the situation in this pirate-infested system only brought everyone's spirits even lower. While House and her Ludwig and their teams worked on restoring the Comore, Zala sent out several probes towards the world formerly inhabited by remnants of the domain. These people were gone, and the few settlements left behind were all ruined, but the planet still looked promising. But, unfortunately, the situation was far more complicated. The pirates were there as well, inhabiting the ruins in thousands, clearly split into several rival colonies, and, in the process of their constant infighting, slowly but surely made this poor but habitable world an absolute hellhole. Scans showed that they rammed several ships into the surface of this world, probably as improvised projectiles aimed against their rivals, and radiation leaks from destroyed reactors already rendered large swaths of land uninhabitable. What's more, the pirates clearly had no care about longevity of their lairs, and they were surrounded by increasingly larger clouds of toxic pollution. Under a shrewd management, this could have become a pleasant, albeit cold, place to live. Right now, however, it was turning into yet another wasteland that Persian sector was full of. But even more so, the sight of this destroyed colony got everyone thinking. The people who lived there were very much like them, survivors who found themselves cut off from the rest of humanity when the domain gate network shut down. And yet, they survived for so long, no doubt facing chaos and millions of issues along the way, only for their efforts to end up being in vain, because they were found out by an armada of deranged feral murderers. Then again, would it be better if they were found out by someone from the core worlds? Would the hegemony accept other settlement acting like continuation of the domain? Would the Ludic Church consider them devils from the past and blame them for all the bad things like they always did? Would anyone allow them to live in peace, or would they end up being conquered by a superior power? Maybe some thought Ludics really were right. Maybe the way to survive really was to keep one's head down, live on a small farm and never attract any attention from space. Others, however, asked themselves another question. If such a settlement of remnant domain colonists survived, then were there others like them? Were there other failed attempts at rebuilding civilization? Were there other groups trying to carve a place for themselves? And finally, would such groups end up being hostile one day? No one could answer those questions, of course, but people talked about it anyway for a few days, at least until they reached their next destination, a system at the edge of the sector, where Galatian Academy wanted them to drop off a sensor package. Simple job, but because cart logistics was cart logistics, it would not be done without distractions. When the company arrived in the system, their sensors showed yet another world covered in ancient ruins. Now, these were nothing unexpected, of course. The entire sector was marked for colonization by the domain after all, but these ones were odd, for they were placed on a deadly, inhospitably toxic world. A cursory scan indicated that any settlement placed on the surface would have had to be extremely well protected and shielded from the elements, which meant that someone needed a really good reason to set up shop down there. Now, the ruins were not large, a single complex of buildings built on a high mountain where the concentration of toxic elements in the air was the lowest, but still, it being there in the first place was weird. As such, when Mr. Katz decided to send a salvage team to check it out, he also sent Dr. Disco and his medical team, as well as several more scientifically minded crew members, who could maybe figure out what the hell was going on down there. Unfortunately though, the place was not as impressive as everyone thought. While it clearly was domain-made, there was an emblem of the long-dead nation painted on almost everything, it turned out that it was mostly just a storage facility, or at least the surviving part of it was. Over the unknown years, corrosive atmosphere of this world slowly walked its way through walls of the building, and some parts of it were now twisted amalgamations of corroded or molten metal. The rest, however, was empty. Empty rooms, empty hallways, empty storage halls, and yet the place still had power. A reactor was chugging along quietly somewhere, keeping the lights on, even though said lights illuminated nothing but dust and empty corridors. But that changed when the salvager team reached lowest level and saw thousands upon thousands of caskets lined up against the walls. Cryopods. "Where the hell are the occupants?" Varuna asked, as they marched through this cavernous room, passing open, empty pods. Some engineers were already dismantling some of them for parts. "There," House said, pointing at a row of pods at the very end of the hallway. There they were, around 200 still occupied ones, all marked with the domain logo. When the team saw them, everyone stopped dead in their tracks. "You think these are actual, real domain people? From the past?" Zala asked, clearly awestruck. "If they are, they probably won't be happy to see what the galaxy has in store for them," Disco replied coldly. "Then let's not wake them up," Mr. Card decided over the comm. His drone was, of course, with the team, filming everything. "House, Varuna, take your teams and check everything from top to bottom again. Maybe we missed something or there's some hidden room somewhere. If we could find out some records of this place, then maybe we'll learn who's inside of these pods and figure out why they're still there while everyone else is gone." So the pirate and lieutenant nodded and moved out, while Mr. Cart ordered Dr. Disco and his med team to investigate the pods without opening them, and oversee engineers who were disassembling empty ones. Then his drone left to explore the place once again too, but found nothing over the next few hours. Eventually, both Varuna and House's teams reported no new findings as well, and everyone felt slightly dejected by that. But then, few moments later, a comm ringed, and a voice of Dr. Disco could be heard from the other side, and he sounded rather concerned. "Captain, per your orders, I checked the pods and I found something wrong with them. They all show pretty much the exact same reading, so I decided to take a gamble and open up some of them." "What the hell, I told you precisely to not open them!" Mr. Cart shouted. "These people inside may be unstable or have a panic attack or... Hell, you are the doctor here. Shouldn't you know opening cryopods without preparation is dangerous for the people inside?" "It is, yes, which is why I have a medical team on standby with me. And it's better to be on a safe side. I have seen such things before. Pirates would lure people in with seemingly occupied cryopods which were stuffed with explosives." "Not one of my proudest moments back in the day, but it worked," House chimed in from his comm. "Precisely. But it's not bombs this time. It's weirder, Captain. There was indeed a man in the first cryopod we opened, a very well-built and tall man. I'm sure he is way over 2 meters. But the thing is that the same man was in the second pod, and the third. We opened 10 of them, and they all seemed to contain the exact same person." "A large family, then?" Mr. Cart tried. "A family would have some differences. These are all identical on both physical and biological level. We have an entire row of pods full of clones here, Captain. But they're weird clones. They got up from cryosleep like it was waking up from a nap. No vomiting, no muscle degeneration. But we can't seem to communicate with them. They just stand there in a line and stare at nothing." Mr. Cart was quiet for a moment before he finally said, "Do they have anything unusual on them? Cybernetics, tattoos, things like that?" "They do. They all seem to have a small comm package implanted directly into their heads, and while their bodies don't have any adornments, these comlinks do. Looks like serial numbers. They all seem to start with letters DCAD, Disco said, and he and his assistants carefully examined naked clones before them. The clones paid them no attention and just stared blankly forward with their large black eyes. "Of course they do," Mr. Cart sighed. "Can you switch me to the loudspeaker? I want to try something." Dr. Disco did just that, and a few seconds later Mr. Cart broadcasted a noise. It sounded like a distorted, guttural parody of human speech, and no one who heard it understood the words. No one except the clones. As soon as the speech-like noise went silent, they all saluted stiffly, marched back to their pods where they opened small logboxes at the bottom, and began to get dressed in uniform grey featureless spacesuits. Without further word, they lined up again, staring at Dr. Disco. "They're going to follow your instructions now, Doctor," Mr. Card said over the comm. "Tell them to unpack the rest of their fellow crewmates, and they should do it without your help in a matter of minutes. Then bring them up to our largest transport ship. We're going to have to get them some proper accommodations. And on that note, House, you on the line?"
"Always, Captain."
"Good. Get your team back down there. Varuna, you too. We need to bring those cryopods back on board."
"Sure thing. Why, though? It'll just be a waste of space."
"Not entirely, House," Mr. Cart replied. "We won't need them, but our new friends will, because without them they will fall apart within a few months. Literally." His words, while sounding a bit weird, were enough to spur everyone into action. Entire salvage team gathered on the lowest level and methodically prepared now empty cryopods to move, while the clones silently helped out. Unfortunately, out of 200 pods, 8 must have suffered some form of malfunction, for when they were opened, Disco's medical team found only weird, organic sludge inside. It took them an entire day to bring the rest of the clones and their cryopods back on board of the fleet. The shuttles had to make several trips and undergo decontamination between each one. Eventually, though, everyone was back in the fleet, and the clones were gathered on board of the newly acquired Buffalo-class freighter, because it was the only ship where all of their pods could fit in. Some of the crews gathered there as well to observe the new guests, and some, mostly followers of Ludd, were already grumbling.
"Devils,"
they muttered.
"Inhuman abominations,"
others added.
"This here is the reason why Domain has fallen, for they were playing God,"
they jeered. At least until Varuna gave them a smile like a shark. Then they remembered that they had a clone on board at all times, and she knew where they lived. Still, they only moved their grumbling out of the earshot, and some already started plotting how to kick the clones out of the airlock, until Zala personally came on board and told them to shut up. Mr. Cart was always impressed how this one faithless still had so much sway over so many faithful. She told them that yes, the clones were indeed an abomination in the eyes of Ludd, but it was not their fault they existed, and those who created them were no doubt already burning in hell for centuries now. And even though the Prophet would call them soulless, it was the duty of all believers to help these strays find their souls, or make them from scratch if need be. One could listen to this peaceful preaching and almost forget that Zala used to be a religious fanatic and a terrorist. Nevertheless, her words calmed the Luddigs down, and reluctantly they agreed to work together with the clones, though Mr. Cart had no doubt some of them would probably not return from their next shore leave. Still, while this issue was dealt with, there were oh so many more others, like who the hell these clones even were, and why were they here? Okay, so these are Domain clones, that we can say for sure, Zala said, still trying to wrap her head around this situation, after she finally got her fellow believers to back off. But what were they doing here? And where the hell did they come from? Another Tridac facility? No, they're much older than that, Mr. Cart replied. Never saw them with my own eyes before, but these must be old Domain colonizer clones. First-wave settlers, they called them. Every time Domain wanted to colonize something, they first sent their probes, like that one we found earlier, and automated ships to build some basic infrastructure there. Then they wouldn't let their people in right away. First, they send in these clones to see if organic human beings could actually survive life in the colony, and to help with small-scale construction. They were sent to live in a designated spot for a year or two or more, depending on conditions on site, and when automated systems decided that they were doing good enough, the clones would be decommissioned to make space for real colonists. And how exactly would they be decommissioned, boss? Varuna asked, unblinking. Well, from what I've heard, usually they just go to hydroponics, lie down, and become nutrients for the farms. They were made to be easily biodegradable, and from what I know, designed to only live a few years, or even less, depending on where they were being sent. That's why we should keep them in cryo if they're not needed. Let them roam around, and they will literally dissolve in front of your eyes over the next few months. I see. What is with human hatred for clones? Varuna asked angrily. Why people look at us and the first thought they have is how best to abuse these beings? Because to most people, clones are just tools, not actual people, Mr. Katz said, and Zala and House nodded along. They used to think so too, but serving with Varuna changed their minds. Dr. Disco, however, just stared blankly. Alright, it's fucked up, yes, Zala said. But if they're supposed to be colonists, then why can't they talk? They can, only we can't understand it. Domain also treated them like tools, and, nobody wants their tools to suddenly start talking to them. So they conditioned them with a kind of language made specifically for them. So that was that weird noise you made when they started listening to you, Disco said, his eyes widening. But how do you even know how to talk to them? I don't. Not properly, at least. I know some basic commands used by their domain handlers because I once talked with a spacer who found an ancient colony ship, Mr. Katz said. He apparently found a manual with those instructions on board, and I convinced him to sell me a copy. Expensive, but I thought it could pay off one day. After all, if he found one colony ship, maybe there were others out there. If there are, they'd be a treasure trove of knowledge, Disco said. But I'm surprised you actually talked with that captain, sir. I thought you preferred to keep to yourself. I do, but that doesn't mean I don't talk to people. Don't look at me like that. I know how to socialize. I'm on the comms all the time when you're enjoying your shore leave. I find that hard to believe, Chief, Zala said, and everyone, including Varuna, nodded. Who do you even talk with, then? Merchants. Business contacts, all the captains, ground control crews. You'd be surprised how eager they are to talk to anyone, especially on quiet, out-of-the-way stations. But mostly I talk to other spacers, ones who enjoy peace and quiet of their ships a lot more than loud stations and spaceports. Okay, that I can believe, Zala smiled. Though I wonder how many of those quiet types are actually just star-mad, or are trying to probe you for info on how to best raid and ambush our fleet. Most of them, probably, which is why I'm mostly lying to them. I just hope they don't lie back to me too much. Alright, we're getting distracted here. Linguistic issues aside, the question is, what do we do with these clones? They're not very useful just standing there doing nothing. I hope you don't say we should try and kick them out, Varuna said bitterly. What? No, of course not. The hell you take me for? I just don't know what we can do if... Then allow me to dispel all your doubts, people, Disco said firmly, stepping forward. He raised up his datapad, its screen filled with numbers. Unless we want to see them decompose and turn into compost in front of our eyes over the next month or two, we need to put them back in their cryopods. My team and I did some more tests, and we can say for sure these creatures' lifespan is very short. They are liquefying from inside out right as we speak. Then let's hope I can convince them to go back to sleep until we find a solution, Mr. Katz replied, and his drone floated towards the clones. He tried using the same command as before, but the rows of identical faces just stared at the machine blankly. He tried saying it backwards, using different intonations or variants, but there was still no response. Oh, for House grumbled, and rushed towards one of the clones and grabbed him by the neck. You, there, inside, he shouted, pointing at the cryopod and then pushed the empty-eyed man towards it. It looked odd. The clone was much larger than House, and certainly better built, but it took this abuse like a meek sheep. Varuna cursed under her breath and moved towards House to stop him, but his plan worked. The clone obediently disrobed himself, revealing absolutely zero parts anyone could blush about, and lied down in the cryopod. Violence is always the answer, House said smugly, but his smile waned when he saw Varuna's face. He turned back to the clone and pointed at the rest of his copies. Them, inside too, now. The clone barked some nondescript noises, and its brothers did exactly as it ordered, and moments later they were all back in their cryopods. Disco and his medical team sealed every last one of them, and the doctor turned to the rest of the group. "This will put a strain on the reactor, so make sure you put aside some money for repairs and spare parts, Commander," he said to Mr. Card's drone. "And as for the rest of you, make sure someone is keeping an eye on this room at all times. We don't want anyone tampering here, especially not your kind, Pather." The last bit was directed at Zala, but she didn't respond. Instead, she wondered if there was someone out there who could help these clones with their rapid decomposition. "Tritakian probably has extensive knowledge," Disco said, and received a row of cold stares for it. "I know I wasn't going to suggest we go to them, but we are already working for the collection of smartest people in the system, so next time we're at Galatian Academy, we could ask them." "We can decide later. For now, they should be safe back in their pods, and we have more stuff to do. But I agree, there probably isn't any other option," Mr. Card said, and a few moments later everyone returned to their posts. And House posted a few of his most trusted and most vicious people to keep everyone away from clone tanks, and the company fleet returned to their mission. Said mission, fortunately, wasn't all that difficult. This time, the job for Academy just entailed dropping a scan satellite in some asteroid ring, and though everyone wondered just what exactly Galatians wanted with this seemingly insignificant group of space rocks, no one could really figure it out. Next job seemed equally simple, at first. The fleet was to recover a device of some kind from a probe orbiting a star a few light years away. It seemed like a simple salvage job, until Cartragistics actually arrived at its destination and found out that the probe was surrounded by an entire cloud of destroyed ships. Scans of the device were weird either, with bizarre power fluctuations coming from it. And even when Midnight Dissonant looked at the data, she wasn't able to figure out just what the hell this device even was. However, everyone agreed that it was probably responsible for turning all those ships floating around into wrecks, and so House's salvagers pulled straws to decide which one of them would go in and try to retrieve it, while the rest of their ships retreated to a, hopefully, safe distance. Once they were gone, the few unlucky salvagers, and one overly enthusiastic volunteer, flew a shuttle towards the probe and started dismantling it to get to the device inside. It seemed safe, for a while.
"Lads, the thing just got a massive energy spike,"
House said to his crew over the comm.
"And I'm not trying to scare you or anything, but it kinda looks like it's gonna blow, so maybe hurry the fuck up."
In response, his scrappers sent a flurry of panicked profanities, but fear allowed them to finish their walk before power readings became too dangerous.
"Okay, nobody tells them how close they were to ending all of us,"
House said as he looked at the readouts. Zala tried to downplay it and say that it couldn't have been that bad, but one look at the sensor console turned her face pale. If the explosion actually happened, it wouldn't just take down the away team, it would swallow half of the system and entire Cart Logistics fleet with it. So she agreed with House's idea, and the rest of the people who saw the readings did so too. Mr. Cart went a step further and sent each member of the salvage team a hefty bonus of 120 escreds, more than a yearly wage, and allowed the crew to go wild with drinks for a day. It was, fortunately, enough to convince everyone to not ask any questions. But when the crew started celebrating their sudden shore leave away from shore, officers of the fleet gathered in Varuna's room, where they looked at the readings once more.
"Okay, the first thing we should do after we get back to the Academy is to take hostages to show them we're not to be jerked around,"
House said firmly, while Zala desperately tried to calm him down.
"This here was a trap designed to blow us up. Fuck, it almost certainly blew up all those other ships."
"True, but we don't know if this was intentional," Varuna said. "You saw and heard those academics before. They're brilliant, sure, but in an extremely idiotic way. They probably forgot to mention their probe had some defensive mechanism put in. Or, more likely, they didn't even know because someone made it while high on all drugs they could find." "Doesn't matter," Mr. Cart cut in. "Truth is, we all could have died out there, and the Academy should have warned us about it. We'll see how they'll react when we confront them. For now, the recovered device is unpowered and safe, and House's people are under orders to shoot dead anyone who even thinks about getting close to it. I would like to know what this thing is, though. I am afraid it is designed to avoid outside tampering, Dr. Disco said, and immediately took a step back. No, I did not touch it. When the crew brought it through the contamination, it got scanned automatically by airlock sensors. Whatever it is, it jams all attempts of observing it from outside, and I'd rather not open it, just like you. However, there is something else. I took a look at the readings when they were dismantling it, and that power surge... We have seen something like that before. Wait, I get it, Mr. Katz said, suddenly enlightened. I knew it felt familiar. This power surge looked exactly like the one that blasted us in hyperspace all those months ago. Remember when those weird hyperspace things jumped us? Everyone in the room checked their readings again, and Varuna compared them to these old ones her boss mentioned. They were almost exactly the same, only that the ones originated from the mysterious Academy device seemed a lot more deadly. My bet is that the power difference was caused because it was used in real space, Disco theorized, but without examining the device, something no one was too eager to attempt, there was no way to know for sure. Instead, however, Card Logistics received a chance to confirm that these readings were indeed very similar to the previous ones, for as soon as they left the system, their sensors picked up several new contacts, and one look at them was enough to see that they moved way too fast for anything made by humans. Oi, wake up people, the ghosts are back! Jesselton shouted over the comms as 3 bizarre signatures started orbiting the fleet at breakneck speeds, while a 4th one followed at a distance. Within the next few seconds, everyone were at their stations. This might have been a fleet of ragtag smugglers and life failures, but they were getting good at their jobs. Unfortunately, the ghosts, as people started calling them, were fast as well, and soon all 3 orbiting signatures blasted them with their energy pulses. "Boss, you alive?" Varuna shouted, rushing into Mr. Card's cabin. He was still upright, mostly because he was connected to all the cables of his piloting harness. A small trickle of sick dripped from under his helmet. "Yep," he groaned, clearly in pain. "Fuck, they were faster this time." Despite going through something that Varuna couldn't even describe, her boss still kept his hands on controls, and as soon as their own energy pulse was ready, he flicked the switch. The entire fleet shrieked as its reactors discharged a wave of energy in all directions, and, few seconds later, the ghosts were gone. Lieutenant rushed to her boss's side, but he was already fiddling with his helmet. "Don't worry, it's not as bad as before," he said, wiping off his bizarre face. "Bastards can disable most of my implants with those pulses, but Midnight helped me build in some shielding into my suit, and it looks like it worked." "And good thing it did. Last time a single one of those almost killed you, and now we got hit by 3 of them. Looks like all the systems are coming back online in the fleet. Computer, you okay?" "Affirmative. The shielding we walked on with Pilot Cart was applied to my temporary processing unit as well. It did not prevent all damage, but at least it didn't completely overload my systems like last time." The AI almost sounded relieved. "Good," Mr. Katz said from above the sink, "but I don't think this was an accident. We uncover a thing that seems to replicate those ghosts' power discharges, and the very moment we take it into hyperspace we get jumped by them. I really think we should ask Academy a few more questions." "Yes, we do, boss. At this point I'm really starting to think they're trying to kill us." "I don't think so. Not intentionally, at least. But we'll see. Now it looks like the fleet is back online and everything works again. So get back to your posts. And don't worry, Varuna, I'm fine. Let's finish this job so we can get back to civilized space." She smiled at that, for it's been a while since she heard anyone calling Persian sector civilized. Still, the company moved on, and the universe decided to make up for their otherworldly ambush very soon, because the moment the fleet arrived in the next system, eyes of all sensor officers went wide.
"Captain, I think we hit a payday here,"
House said, his voice giddy with excitement.
"Got a huge reading on long-range scans. Stationary one and with no comm activity. Could be an orbital."
Distracted yet again, the boss gave an order to fly there, And soon, indeed, it turned out that the signature was an orbital ring base, or half of one. Initially, it seemed like it was damaged, possibly in combat or by some internal malfunction, but closer examination showed that the missing parts were not destroyed, but seemingly orderly disassembled. It was as if someone decided to dismantle this base and stopped halfway through the job. The remaining sectors of the station still had power, but no one replied to comm requests, and after an Explorer probe was launched towards the station and reported that it had no automated defenses, for they seemed to have been dismantled as well, Mr. Cart ordered a large group of salvagers, including Zala, House, Disco and Varuna, to go on board and check it out. Their shuttles had no problems on approach, and a team quickly found an operational airlock and got inside. They didn't know what to expect, but this place surprised them more than anything up to this point.
Holy shit, Zala muttered, spellbound. It's like this place was still operational.
She and the rest of the team broadcasted feed from their suit cameras to the rest of the fleet, so that everyone could see. And the station was clean. Pristinely clean, even. Small, meticulously cut plants grew on the walls, separated by sun lamps, and small screens which, long ago, probably showed data streams but were now blank. White, metallic corridors glistened like stars, and every now and then domestic drones zipped down them, wiping off every bit of dust and dirt they could find. Other drones followed the crew and bombarded them with hollow projections.
Fucking hell, targeted advertising, House complained. Piss off, you toaster, I don't need plastic surgery, I already am perfect.
Guess Domain built this place with some corporate sponsors, Zala said.
Hey, and we know them,
Varuna added, and pointed at the doorway ahead of them.
Look there.
The doors were adorned with the symbol of Human Domain, but inside that symbol was a logo of Tritakian Corporation. They fit in perfectly together, but clearly something, or someone had an issue with that, for the mixed logo was defaced by a large painting of a blue handprint. And as the crew moved deeper into the station, they noticed that, with perfect, mechanical-like precision, every single mark of old authority was painted over. The blue handprint was everywhere, sometimes even welded into metal walls. Someone was very thorough. And as the crew marched forward, looking for something interesting or valuable, Varuna suddenly took a step aside and dove into one of the side corridors. There, she opened a private comm channel to Mr. Cart.
Boss, I've been feeling weird ever since I saw this hand logo and now I finally remember. Wasn't there something like that spray painted onto that ship I found you in?
I don't remember, Varuna. I don't think so. You're probably remembering something wrong.
Oh, no, I don't. Don't bullshit me, boss. I know when you're lying,
she said, and when Mr. Cart remained silent, she eventually added,
Look, I'm not gonna pressure you if you don't want to talk about it, but at least tell me if we're in danger here.
No, you're safe, he finally replied. Whoever was in this place clearly left ages ago.
If you say so. Now, oh shit, that was Zala!
Varuna rushed out of the side corridor and ran towards the noise she heard. In her ear, Zala and her team were gasping as if choking on air. Didn't take long to find them. An entire crowd of people gathered in front of a doorway in one of the corridors, and everyone was pushing, but not to get out, but to get in. Varuna elbowed her way through them and joined Zala just in time to see her high-fiving House.
Payday indeed, you metallic monstrosity,
she said with a bright smile, and pointed to the room. It was a massive, hangar-like warehouse, and it was packed from top to bottom with military equipment. Tanks, hovercraft, and crates of weapons and munitions were neatly arranged in the room, and you could easily outfit a small army with them. Interestingly, as Varuna noticed, they too bore marks of Domain and Tritakion, and just like everyone they saw in the station, these marks were painted over with a picture of Blue Hand. No one in the room really cared about it though, for contents of this single warehouse were worth more than some planets earned in a year. Fleet engineers were already rummaging through this equipment and wonder how much it could be sold for, and who it should be sold to once the fleet gets back to the core. But not everyone was in the room. When Varuna disentangled herself from the crowd of cheerful scrappers, she learned that Dr. Disco's team moved deeper in, towards the docking bay. And, moments later, she received a confirmation over the comms. "Away crew, fleet crew, we have a ship in the docking bay. Old military transport model, looks like. The engines were dismantled, but it still has power. I thought it was weird at first that they left reactor on board, but when we checked inside, well, we found the reason. There are cryopods inside the ship, and it looks like we have more clones inside them." The scrappers didn't much care, already busy trying to bring the largest tank back to the fleet, so Mr. Cart ordered Varuna to go check it out. And when she entered the old transport ship, she immediately realized that these cryopods were slightly different, and the occupants were probably different as well. The caskets were significantly larger, and according to Disco's readouts, it looked like the occupants were larger too, exactly 2.5 meters tall. A quick look at other pods confirmed what he said earlier. Every one of them showed the same reading, which meant the sleepers inside were clones. But as Med's team argued what to do with them, Varuna noticed that these pods were also marked with the Domain Tritac logo. Except, unlike everything else on the station, these ones didn't have a blue handprint spray painted onto them. She wondered what this could mean, while Dr. Disco argued with her boss. "I'm telling you, Commander, it is safer for everyone to open a single pod here and not back in the fleet. This is a military transport. Whatever is inside is big. Better to do a safe test here." "Fine, but just one and keep everyone away from it, understood? Alright, open it up." The Syndrian doctor nodded and pressed a button on the machine, and what happened afterwards happened way too fast for everyone's liking. The lid on the pod popped open like it was pressurized, and mere 2 seconds later a figure walked out of it, wearing heavy combat armor. It immediately knelt down and reached to an extendable drawer at the bottom of its pod and fished a menacing heavy rifle from it.
"Disco, get your med team out of here!"
Varuna rushed forward, placing herself between her and the doctor. She wondered if she could even slow this soldier down. According to the readings on the screen nearby, when Disco pressed the button, this clone received a bold dose of combat stimulants. All medics rushed to the exit, but this trooper could probably easily catch up to them, and he didn't need to because he had that rifle. But instead of pulling the trigger, the clone shouldered his weapon and stood at attention, clicking its heels. The visor on its helmet rose up, revealing the exact same face the colonizer clones had, only slightly larger and more rugged. It stared blankly at everyone in the room, until finally his eyes stopped on Varuna. He took one look at her old armor, and saluted.
"Tritacian officer, what are our orders?"
it said. Varuna and Disco stared at each other for a moment, utterly confused.
"Your orders are to stand down, soldier,"
Varuna tried, and the clone immediately relaxed and, most importantly, put his gun away. Everyone in the room breathed a sigh of relief. "Well then," the doctor said, wiping a trail of sweat from his face. "Guess you are a real officer now." Varuna laughed, but it was more of a stress reaction. And then she wondered just what the hell was Domain's deal with these clones. And, more importantly, why could they find them and not actual humans anywhere?